Hello, everybody. Welcome to that word chat. I am so glad to be with you because interesting story. I'm doing it remotely, as you can see, from the Logan County Library in the Hocking Hills of Ohio on the edge of Appalachia, however you want to pronounce it. And I told Karen we're going to be a little bit dangerous today because I had a kind of a tight schedule to get here. Well, on the way here, we have a camper. We're going camping, and we blew out a tire, brand new tire. So I've only just set up, and I've got a camera right here, but I don't have it set up yet. I'm just going to sit, which I think will work. And so, Karen, my apologies for being a little bit discombobulated, but Karen and I have been friends for years, and she's so easy to talk to, and we always fly by the seat of our pants a little bit anyway with these shows. So we're going to be doing that today. One thing in Karen Yin is the author of the Conscious Style Guide style book. And she's I said to her beforehand, there's so much in there. There's so much information, so many good tips on kind of the whole gamut of what you might describe as conscious language that I didn't know where to like focus or where to. We're going to ask her some of what she wants to talk about. But if you have questions, I think this is a great opportunity. There's so many people in the room. Ask your question in the room, in the chat, excuse me, and Heather will set it up for you to come on camera and ask your question because there are probably all sorts of things we could talk about, and I don't want to necessarily direct it. You guys can direct it as you see fit. So Karen Yin is the founder of the Conscious Style Guide, the Conscious Style Guide website, the Editors of Color database, also the database of the diverse database.
There are too many things.
Too many things. Yeah.
Diverse database.
Children's books and
Yeah.
and all sorts of wonderful stuff. And she's a good friend. So, Karen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so sorry you blew out your new tire. Like it's even more heartbreaking that it was new. Like I really feel that.
Yeah, brand new. But thankfully, it was touch and go rush, but we were able to get service. Somebody came out, put the spare tire on. We were like halfway, so we could have gone back home, and I could have done it from the usual spot, or we could have pressed on, and that's what we did. And so my wife helped just pull everything together and get my jacket ready and stuff like that. So
You
anyway,
look great.
yeah, we won't spend any more time on that. So what's the reception been for the book?
Oh my gosh. I think definitely amongst editors and writers, the reception has been huge. Like I've been getting like love attacks everywhere. And, as a shy person who is, very introverted, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what to do with this outpouring of like enthusiasm. It's like, wow, really? You want to read my book? So I'm really deeply honored. And also I see all the support and the spreading of the word from people everywhere. So I'm really touched. And I think that this will be hopefully a life-changing book for many editors and writers because I present language in a different way. Like I want you to have this other way of thinking about language, and I want to introduce like options, because isn't that what we want? We want options so that we can make a wise choice.
Right, right. And that's the thing. And that's the thing. I mean, there are a lot of style guides out there, and you quote them and send people to the various style guides and say, this is an authority on this topic, this is authority on that topic. But your goal isn't to do the AP style guide for everything conscious language. Your goal is to, I guess, the conscious part of it means we think about things before we write them, right?
Exactly. So the reason why I did not make it like an entry-based style guide like the AP style book is because there are already so many guides out there. For example, I love the diversity style guide. It's at diversitystyleguide.com. So if you want to have some kind of a like entry by entry kind of an inclusive and conscious language guide for mainstream and media use, then there's already things you can look to. So I don't want to reproduce that. Instead, with this book, my main goal was to bridge this gap that I had been noticing between people wanting to be more inclusive and just not knowing exactly how to get there. So not knowing how to get there can be either they don't have the resources, or it can mean there are a lot of feelings that get in the way. So in this book, I talk about like how to understand yourself first, how to ground yourself in a better understanding of the way you think and what you believe in, and even your working style, so that you have a better foundation to deal with these incoming language changes. Because without this foundation, I can totally see why people do feel like, oh, they're just a piece of seaweed in the ocean and you go wherever the wave takes you. I want you to have more of a connection to language and not feel like you're just a piece of floating debris.
Mhm. But there's also practical advice, right? I mean, there's a little bit of both. And how much of this is how does it differ from the website, which you've been doing for probably what, 6 or 8 years now?
Yeah, I launched consciousstyleguide.com in 2015, and actually I debuted it at an ACES conference. So I view this book as a companion to that, because what I have been really aware of that the website was missing was this bridge, because it kind of presents all these conclusions, right? I have style guides created by marginalized communities that tell you what language they would like you to use. I also have articles that kind of bring you up to speed with like how the conversations are going. But what's missing is this bridge that helps you create a foundation so that you can receive all this information. And I think that without this bridge, then it can seem like, oh, not, like these are all kind of disconnected pieces of advice. And I like to feature contradictory opinions that are all like promoting equity, to show you that this is a very complex topic. If like these do and don't lists are really helpful, but there's also this huge conversation going on that lead people to create lists for easier use. So the part with the conscious style guide, I want to talk about that later. Like between my website and the title of this book, I want to talk about this. I think editors might find this amusing, but um, the largest section is chapter 3, which is all about best practices. So it is so large that my editor was like, what can we cut from this? And I said, well, what would you like to cut from this? Right? Because it was just too massive for
Mhm.
her. She was like, this is not like any of the other chapters going to stick out. And I said, what if we lean into it? Like, I mean, this is a style guide. What if we just lean into all these overarching guidelines that help people consider things for their context and make a decision that makes sense for their audience? So we left it intact. Um, I don't know if I should even say that my draft was actually like 20, 30,000 words over, and I cut those because I
Oh,
wanted to make this as tight as possible.
mhm.
So like there's just so much to deal with. I mean, anytime you talk about language, it's going to be sprawling, and I try to rein it in as much as possible. So,
Mhm.
okay, so the TLDR for this is, if you want lists that tell you what words to use and what words not to use, go to consciousstyleguide.com. I have curated the best lists there. If you want to expand on that and look at the overarching principles to guide your own practice and help you think critically, it's all in chapter 3 of the Conscious Style Guide,
Mhm. Right, the book.
the
Right.
book. Okay, so so my website was called Conscious Style Guide, but because this book has the same title, except it has the in front of it,
Oh.
I'm like, as an editor, I'm like, oh no, like, how do I refer to the website without people thinking I'm talking about the book? I have never used the, even lowercase in front of the website name, but a lot of people do. So like there's that complication, right? So this is actually a good exercise for what I'm talking about in the book, which is you need to always think about the impact, right? So like, what is the impact if I kept referring to my website as Conscious Style Guide? When people know I have a book out, is it going to be really confusing? So I came to the conclusion that yes, it is confusing. So I have started to talk about my website as consciousstyleguide.com, which is not its name, but I
Right.
might change the name on the website just to make it more clear. So like we do these things, right? We retroactively change things that were working to make it easier for our audience so that it has the right impact.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it makes sense, but I mean, it is, I mean, certainly there's not a lot of space between the website and the book in terms of the mission, what it's trying to accomplish. And in fact, let me talk about that. Conscious Style Guide. You were the first one, as far as we know, to really talk about conscious language.
Um, so I came up with that term, conscious language, and conscious style guide. And I chose the word conscious because it means aware, mindful, and intentional. And I knew that there were other adjacent styles of thoughtful language out there that overlapped, but were not exactly my vision of conscious language. So I wanted to have an umbrella term to kind of enclose the kind of language that I was talking about. So so yeah, and here's and the reason why we give things a name is so that we can talk about it. And almost like because I grouped this type of equitable, fair, and respectful language under the name conscious language, then it becomes a thing that we could actually talk about and debate and figure out for ourselves. And without it, just becomes more abstract.
Yeah, but I mean, that's taken off. I guess we needed a term because, I mean, you see it all over the place. I mean, not just from you, but from, people have embraced that term.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased on one hand, and then I'm also like, well, you didn't give me credit.
Yeah, well, sure.
You
It
know,
is,
like it's really gotten away from me. Like, and that's why when people say things like, oh, conscious language is used interchangeably with inclusive language, that's not right. But
no.
like it's gotten away from me to that point where partly my reason for writing this book is to kind of like rein people back in and say, well, inclusive language is one thing and then conscious language is another.
Mhm. Right. Well, tell us what the difference is.
So when I was writing this book, I really thought about like what makes language conscious versus inclusive. So for conscious language, I distilled it to five main components. And I'm going to quickly go over it so that we don't get to, because I know we have a lot to talk about. I call them the five C's. So you have the skillful selection of content, then you have awareness of context, you have the anticipation of consequence, then preservation of complexity, and then probably the most important is emphasis on compassion. So inclusive language, a lot of people think that inclusive language means, oh, you use the broadest term possible. For example, you take a gender term and you make it gender free, and that makes it more inclusive of all genders. So that is one way to be inclusive. But in the conscious language approach, whether you want to use a broad term or a very specific term or a series of specific terms depends on the impact and how you can use it to promote equity. Because when we, for example, let's say I have an article about lesbians. Okay, so it would not be appropriate to use a more inclusive word like LGBTQ or even to say queer because it is this community that I want to focus on. So I would use this, which is more exclusive. Does that make sense? So using
Mhm.
lesbian excludes other queer identities, but that's exactly what I want. And this is why, in the whole scheme of things, right? If you're talking about context, in the bigger picture, this helps lesbians be more visible in a world where if I just said queer people or if I said LGBTQ, then they may be erased. And
Mhm.
that's the problem with a lot of broad terms like people of color or BIPOC, a lot of people get erased. So
Mhm.
that to me, there's a difference between inclusive language versus conscious language. If you are using language for equity, that may mean once in a while using appropriately exclusive language.
Okay. Did you ever did you ever trademark the the term
Conscious style guide, I did. That was trademarked. I
slang?
Yeah, but the odd thing is, so I also have editors of color.com, and I very like for a few seconds I thought, well, should I trademark this also? And it's like, well, no, I just let it be free. Also, the way trademarks work is that you need to be constantly defending your trademark. And I was like, do I
Right.
care about it that much? I may defend the use of conscious style guide because I think some people do use it. And then that can cause I'm sorry, cause confusion between my brand and like their sense. So that might be something I want to defend. But otherwise, I am not that keen on trying to own something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of, well, I don't think I've seen, I'm sure much more aware than I am, of course, but I haven't seen cases where people have misused it or used it inappropriately, it
Mm.
seems.
Good.
It seems like people use it in a good, positive way, the way it was intended, the way you envisioned it when you started. So,
Yeah, so actually, this is a funny story. So there was an article that talked about language for homelessness, and they had the phrase conscious style guide, like they were just talking about it generically. So I wrote to the writer of the piece and I said, hey, I actually have a conscious style guide. Can you link that phrase to my site? Right? So so I turned it into a win instead of oh my gosh, they're using it generically, I might lose my brand.
right, right. So when we last spoke, you were one of our first guests on that word chat when we started a few years ago, and it was right after the George Floyd protests. And it was a time when, people were very in tune and focused on language as a sort of as a result of that. I mean, it took that just to make people sort of really maybe start
Mhm.
thinking a little bit more about the language we use. But I'm curious, what are people talking about now? Are there hot topics that are getting a lot of hits on the website or you're getting a lot of questions about?
There, so the word Latinx has been in at least one mainstream dictionary for many, many years. Like I want to say it was the American Heritage Dictionary online in 2017. But a lot of people
Mm.
still treated it like, oh, it's a brand new word, it won't catch on. Okay, so like I see waves of articles that talk about Latinx versus Latine. And in my book, I address this issue where Latina is more popular right now as a gender neutral term instead of saying Latino or Latina, partly because it's easier to pronounce, like especially for people who speak Spanish. Like Latinx it created a little bit of a block. So a lot of people were immediately saying, "Oh no, that's not going to work, so I'm not going to use it." Some other people were saying, well, they were saying, oh, in their Latino communities, this word is not necessary because Latino is already gender neutral. Latinos is gender neutral. So in the book, I talk about how one of the key things about conscious language is that when we are faced with um, when we are questioning language, the first thing we do is we defer to the community that the language directly affects. So does that mean we defer to Hispanic communities? You can, but to be more precise, you would defer to trans and non-binary Latina people in the community and say, do you support the use of Latinx or Latine? It is them that I will consult first. If you consult all of maybe all of the queer community, or if you consult all of the Latin American community, then you're not really going directly to the community that is directly affected. So not only here am I thinking intersectionally, but I'm also thinking, well, this language affects them. Like they should have the most say, you know, unless there's some reason that they should not have the most weight. And I can't even think of a situation where that would be, then I would always defer to them first. And as editors, this makes our job easier. So instead of being tormented by language change and saying, oh, well, this new thing is happening. Like, should I stop saying master? Should I stop saying field or stakeholder? Find out what that community says. Support them.
It's difficult though sometimes because you don't know. I mean, there are different communities, and we think of the sort of the broad community of Black people or Latinx, Hispanic people, and there are regional differences too. So different experiences.
Absolutely. So part of the preparation section of the book, I go into figuring out like just having a better understanding of your own boundaries and what you believe in, because unless you are connected to how you think and how you work, it's going to be hard for you to choose. For example, if communities are saying different things, which you will find in, for example, Native Indigenous communities. It's like, what term do you use? Well, some believe in American Indian, some say Indian American, some say, or Native American, or it just goes on and on. So you need to figure out what your definitive resource is. Or what I do is I switch back and forth. Like I don't just use one term. I will use one term here, and I use another term here, and then here I will break it up into very specific identities here. I love variety. That is my approach to conscious language. So depending on what you think makes sense for your audience and your context, you might choose something different. You might say, well, I understand the arguments for person first language, but identity first language really makes a lot more sense to me. And look at all the disability communities who support person first language. So I'm sorry, identity first language. So I'm gonna default to that. And only if there's a special situation, for example, if somebody I'm interviewing uses person first language, will I then switch to person first language? So like I try to present conscious style as flexible. So this is where flexibility comes in. It means depending on who you are, who your audience is, you may choose to be more creative with your terminology. I want to set it up so that the answer is not binary, so that there is no right or wrong. It might be, in certain really clear contexts, certain things are right or wrong. For example, you could say in a picture book for children under 6, do not use the F word, right? I mean, you could say things like that.
A good rule, yeah, good basic
It's a good rule. So you laugh, but I think last time when I came on, I was talking to you about how there is at least one picture book that uses the N word spelled out, right? So like, but generally, if you want to say language is right or wrong, make sure the context is clear, right? So when I was the lead editor, when I ran the editorial department for an ad agency that dealt with movies, for that context, I said, the default is actor. we only use actress if that actor says actress, and then we use actress. But this supports SAG the way, it's been so long. Screen Actors Guild, their awards are for best female actor, best male actor. They don't say actress, right? So if you look to the Oscars, I think they still say actress. I'm not going to look to that broad one. I'm going to go to the actors themselves, this community where they have thought about language for, men and women, and now they're dealing with non-binary categories. So my rule for our small ad agency was, this is the default, and this is when we can use the exceptions.
Mm.
But apart from that, I really hesitate to say, oh, this is a style that we need to use everywhere, because this is how you get caught in that trap of politically correct language, which is it does not satisfy the components for conscious language, because it's missing context, it's missing consequence. There are some times when a word that is perfect for one context is actually might be harmful in another context. So we really need to back out of the word and look at the sentence, the story, and the whole series, look at the big picture to figure out, is this the most appropriate word or narrative or representation for my purposes? What impact will it have? And I don't want to get too technical. I don't want to like repeat my whole book here, but not only are we looking at the impact, but there's short-term impact versus midterm versus long-term. So a lot of things that a lot of people do with inclusive language is they're thinking about the short-term impact. Oh, we could be inclusive here. But what is the long-term impact of choosing this word? And I know I'm oversimplifying this because right now my mind is kind of like only tapping into certain things. But like we need to consider the long-term impact. For example, right now we're dealing with, stop me anytime because I'm rambling.
No,
But
no,
like,
I'm curious about
yeah,
this, like, because
it's
I
like,
haven't quite gotten to where, I haven't quite figured out where we're going with the long-term impact of,
so like right now we are on the precipice of having AI be embedded in everything. So we need to consider, what are the short-term impacts of using AI, and what are the midterm impacts, and what are the long-term impacts? Because that may change your mind on whether you adopt it, and whether you embed it in your software, whether you use it for your work. Like there are all these considerations, and the same is true for language.
Just plain, yeah, language. Well, I mean, I always, and I may have said this last time, that working for a newspaper, um, I would hear the debates about language change, and I always felt like, as a copy editor to the newspaper, my job was to accept that language changed, but not necessarily right away. In other words, I was comfortable being somebody who resisted trends. Um, and I probably say that from a perspective of not, well, I shouldn't say not considering conscious language, because I think that's probably too hard on myself, but it wasn't maybe the main focus at a newspaper. You're thinking about sort of the way we do things. This is a strict, we have strict rules, and we're not going to bend them unless there's a compelling reason, unless we really,
Mhm,
we're not going to
mhm,
be front. But long term, there's the arc of change that, what we consider radical one day is the norm, years later. So let's talk about that. The style guides. What are style guides and dictionaries? You talk about dictionaries in the book. Are they what do you see as their role in sort of being guides for conscious language, and are they doing the job that they should be doing?
I view references as clues. So I almost, or I don't know if I should say this. I sometimes consult one reference, and if I'm satisfied, then I will go by what they say. But otherwise, I treat everything as a clue. So, for example, you might look up a word in um, one dictionary, and it can help you discern between words, because a lot of conscious language is about discerning, like what's the difference between Black American versus African American, right? So we helps us learn how to discern things. But if that is unsatisfactory to me, I may go to another dictionary, because guess what? They don't say the same thing. So
Mhm.
that might explain it in another way. I will definitely consult AP Style Book and Chicago Manual of Style to see if they can add anything to the conversation. So remember, these are all clues. These are all clues, and I'm the one who brings the most context. So they must meet me and in a way so that I feel connected to whatever it is I have decided on. If I don't feel connected to language change, whether it is something new that people are um, encouraging people to use, or oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. But it has to make sense to me, because I mean, not even as an editor, but just as a person, if I use words that I feel really detached from, what does it really mean?
Mhm.
You know, and then if I constantly feel like, oh, this is the latest thing, I have to use it. Oh, here's another latest thing, I'll use it. I might build up resentment towards all these sources, contradictory sources, right? All of these opinions telling me to do things, and they're not even agreeing. And then I'm kind of feeling like, how can I even make a decision? Uh, you know, I don't want, the thing that I'm trying to avoid is for people to get resentful, but then blame communities that have been marginalized for language change. They might, instead of blaming the system, or the powers that be that have set up this system where people are ignored or demeaned, people tend to say, oh, well, if I'm changing my language for trans people, well, then why are they creating this mess for us? Why are they making it harder for us? Why are they complicating my life? Right. And this is what happens. So I wrote my book from a very realistic perspective, meaning we can want something to happen. We can want, people to adopt language and everything is great and they feel great about it. But what happens when we really work with language? All these feelings come up, resentment comes up, anger comes up. So this is why, I don't know if you got there, but there's a section in my book that is about self-care. And you can find it easily because there's actually an illustration for it. And in the section, um, like often when you pick up a hobby, part of learning this new hobby is learning how to um, deal with things that go wrong. So if you are new to hiking, then you might also find in hiking books, oh, what happens with, like, if you have the wrong shoes or the wrong equipment, right? If you learn to bike, oh, here's how you repair your tires. This is what you do. So I thought that for something so sensitive as working with language, it was really, really important for me to include a section on how to deal with your feelings. And I know that there are tips out there for, like, oh, meditation, or you can incorporate movement, or, you can do yoga or even acupuncture. This is different. I really want to make conscious style accessible. So here is a free thing that you can do all alone by yourself at home. Um, you don't need to pay a therapist. All you need is the ability to tap on the ends of meridians on your face and on your body. That is all. You can use one hand, you can use an object. Um, if this sounds, I know this sounds a little odd to a lot of people who are used to um, more traditional styles of science and what I'm trying to say, medicine. But if you believe in acupuncture, then that is the bridge for you to be able to adopt it's called emotional freedom techniques. So I know that other editors use tapping. It's also called tapping, because somebody, and I wish I remembered who did it, but somebody right before the ACES conference was circulating an article they wrote about how they use tapping for anxiety. They didn't name it, but I knew exactly what it was, because this is what they were talking about. So by tapping on the ends of the meridians, You can address issues like anger at changing your language. If you can figure out what that reminds you of while you are tapping, you can hopefully remove the block that is there so that you can view conscious language initiatives from a more grounded and more emotionally clear perspective. Also, if you have been targeted by language, as I have, you can also use it to kind of resolve these traumas inside your body through tapping. And because it's free and because it's so accessible and because you can learn it in like 5-10 minutes, try it. I'm asking people to try it because if we can address our mental health, then we can go further with language change.
That's a very interesting connection. And we just had Russell Harper from Chicago Manual of Style, and he never once mentioned self-care because it's not something we expect to see in a style guide. You don't go to the Chicago Manual of Style.
But so Aaron Brenner's new book,
it
is it
does
called The Chicago Guide
to
to, oh
freelance
my gosh, help me out,
or freelance
for
editor.
freelance editors? That addresses self-care. There is another book about using, I don't know the title, but it overlaps with my book. That has self-care.
Mhm.
This
Well,
is
it makes sense because it's the conscious style guide. I mean, we need to be conscious about the language. We need to be sort of in touch with our own feelings, right?
right. And then because this is so much about impact, right? How does language impact you? How does it impact your audience? How does it impact the people that you're talking about who may not be in your audience? This is all really important. Like a lot of the impacts are about how people feel. And if we don't address it, then we really lose an opportunity to promote self-healing and other healing.
Right.
Yeah. And then often how you feel about a word is the very block that is stopping us from changing our habits, right? So it isn't knowledge. You already know what certain communities want you to use, but sometimes we have a hard time getting there. So what's happening? So this book talks about what is happening in you. Like, I think you need to address that first before you start to use language you don't believe in and just get really mad about it.
Right. We have some questions. I don't want to take up all the time without getting to those. But if you have questions about specific things in language, that's fine. We haven't gotten into too much of that, but of course you can look in the book and certainly look on the website. But buy the book. Is the book out yet, or is it still
Oh, in almost 2 weeks, like 2.5 weeks.
right, end of the month? Yeah.
Yeah, I have my author copy here. It looks just like yours, except it doesn't have that little thing at the bottom.
Okay. All right. It says coming in May. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So let's take some questions from the room.
Yes, thank you. First up is Aaron, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Hello, hi Karen.
Hi.
Nice to see you. My question is, I worded it so well in the chat. I want to make sure that I read it like that I had worded it before. My question is, how do you balance going to a community to learn what language they want you to use with not burdening that community with doing the emotional education of the emotional labor of educating you? That's what I meant to say. So how do you balance going to a community to learn what language they want you to use with not burdening that community with doing the emotional labor of educating you? What is your strategy?
The first thing I would do is I would find out if members of their community have already done the work and put out a style guide of any kind, whether it's a style sheet or a press release or a handbook that already outlines best practices for addressing that community because they have voluntarily done the work. If you want to ask somebody who is around you, who is a member of that community, I would first acknowledge to them that you recognize it is emotional labor and that your question may be offensive. And once you acknowledge that your question may be inappropriate, then gauge their reaction. Some might say, "Oh, no problem. Go ahead, Aaron. I'll answer anything. I'm so glad you're asking me this." Or they might say, "Well, I don't feel qualified, or I'm not in the mood to answer this, or I do find it offensive, and I don't want to answer this question." But that it starts a conversation, right? And it like in the book I talk about how to ask offensive questions. And the first step is to acknowledge that it's offensive. Because like when I am asked offensive questions without the acknowledgement that it is emotional labor for me, then I already have this wall up, right? I literally have like, my little porcupine spines are up. But once I hear that you are aware that this is a hardship for me or potentially triggering in some way, then it's like, oh, okay, this person has done some work. Like, I think I want to help them. Does that make sense? I will also ask individuals questions, understanding that no one person speaks for like an entire community. I don't speak for my, whatever communities I believe in. I'm just one clue. Does that make sense? So like, they're one clue. Books written by members of that community are another clue. Podcast interviews are another clue. Like I try to gather as many like sources and try to expose myself to as many voices as possible so that instead of being one thing, it's like many things. And then it takes shape. I start to notice, oh, this type of language is actually in-group language that is probably inappropriate for me to use. This is the language they're using for the mainstream, right? If they write an article for mainstream consumption. So this seems to be appropriate for me to use as well. Do you understand? So I think that immersion is the way to go. Did I answer your question?
You absolutely did, and I really
Okay.
appreciate it. Thank
And
you.
I want to remind people that learning conscious language is not unlike other things that you learn. Like when I want to learn more about wine, first I went to like wine guides, right? You have the wine guides. And then I have like the individual bartenders or the servers. Then I would ask them about that specific wine. And then I would do wine tasting, right? Learn more from each of those teachers who are, so like I have all this information about wines so that I can come to my own conclusions about what I like, And what I like, it may not be what people are promoting. Like I like a deep, medium-bodied red for my vegetarian food. Would people usually pair a medium-bodied stuff with veg? No, but that's how I like it. I want it to be like substantial. Okay, I'm getting off the topic.
No, this is
But,
a new side of you. Now, I know you're a coffee snob. I didn't know you were now getting into the wine snob thing too.
oh my gosh. So if you look at my AP versus Chicago logo, literally there is a quill and a wine bottle for the crossbones.
True. Yeah, I always thought it was a poison bottle. It's a wine
Oh,
bottle.
ooh, I like it.
So AP versus Chicago is what started. I mean, that's where I met you on Twitter as that account. And is that you said you're a shy person, and I found that to be fairly true. You're very much in the public. And
Mhm.
was AP versus Chicago your first foray into the wider world?
This is such a good question because I think about it a lot. So I think that our first meaningful interaction was because I had placed second in this haiku grammar contest. So you reached out to me and you said, "Oh, you won second, like what's your bio?" And at that point, everything I did for AP versus Chicago was anonymous. I did not use my name. So I felt like that was when I thought, oh my gosh, is this an appropriate time for me to come out? Also, I had already quit this horrible, horrible job where I was. So I didn't have to worry about, oh, if they're gonna connect me to this agency. Um, so I gotta tell you, being in the public eye, or just doing anything on like a big level, even like I was gonna say tweeting, but we don't. Twitter's dead, so we don't tweet anymore. Yeah, even just putting something out there for the world to see, it's like fills me with deep angst. Well, first of all, a good thing I have tapping, and then secondly, um, I recognize that this is the language of now. And as somebody who has always adapted, right? Being someone who is not white and not um, a boy, and not, I say boy because I'm thinking of myself as a child. I'm not part of the dominant culture in many senses. I've always had to adapt to make sure I fit in. So I just see this as another way of fitting in. Like as an author, I'm now adapting to the author life where I'm giving talks and I'm meeting people and I'm showing up to in-person events. And gosh, this is so interesting for an introvert. It's like, okay, well, I feel like learning conscious language is similar, where you at first think, oh, well, this makes no sense to me at all. But then you kind of warm up to the idea. And it's in the warming up to the idea that you kind of figure out, oh, I see. So actually, I thought my boundary was here with language, but actually, it's here. It's here because this now makes sense to me. This is now normal. um, People around me use it, it's used in the media, I use it. And then the next word comes along and you say, oh, my boundary's here, I'm not going to use that word. But then you realize, oh, actually, that makes sense now for me as well. So it's all about adapting and expanding, right? So as a person, as an introvert, I have adapted and expanded. And as an advocate of conscious language, I'm continually adapting and expanding. People think it's easy for me for some reason, but why would changing my language be easy? It's hard for everybody.
Right.
The thing is, we just don't talk about it. Except in this book, I want to talk about it. I
Yeah.
want to talk about how hard it is.
Well, I'm glad I'm glad even as an introvert that you're chose to share so many great things with us. And we have a few more minutes and a couple more questions.
We do. The next one is from Cora. Cora, if you want to unmute and ask.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I am really curious about your thoughts on, there was an article that circulated at the beginning of last year called Against Copy Editing. And it was very controversial within our community. But I was really interested in the argument that the term copy editing itself might need to change, or need to be thought more consciously about, in a way that we can include conscious language, and think about the history of the industry. I'm not phrasing this question very well, but anyways, I was curious about your thoughts on that particular change or question or concern around our industry and the language we use for it.
Okay. Gosh, I skimmed that article. I guess I did not read it carefully enough, because I don't remember this part, but this is a good way for me to describe how I approach any kind of like proposed language change. So my first thing is I will say, well, what is the current impact of using copy editing? What might the impact be of changing our language to whatever is proposed? If we change our language, what are the negative impacts? Like, are we losing people? Will there be miscommunication? What is gained by using this new terminology? So all those things need to be kind of answered to some level of satisfaction before I will seriously consider it, because sometimes people will propose language that I think is unnecessary. For example, I don't think that gaslighting, that word is really necessary. First of all, people immediately started using it wrong. People are using it to not describe what it was originally intended to describe. And now it's become this kind of like a really diluted thing about anytime you are disagreeing with someone's reality, then that's gaslighting, which I don't think is true. But instead of gaslighting, like we already have words such as deceive, lie, fool. Like as a queer person, I'm noticing a lot of these new words pop up, and it's like, oh, I already have my old-fashioned words for those. Does that make sense? So like, it has to be, it has to have really clear benefits, or the old language has to have clear harms for me to switch over. The reason why I don't want to immediately switch as soon as I hear of a new word is because I am really, really conscious that in real life, when we are extremely kinetic with language, that actually causes people, it causes them to feel really nervous, and it creates fear. And also, it creates a lot of frustration. So anytime I am a proponent of language change, I consider that. I think, what is the overall impact to society? Are we going to turn people off to using inclusive and conscious language? So I'm not really telling you what to do as much as I'm giving you a way to think about it. And this is the whole point of my book. I want you to be able to approach it in a way that makes sense to you, so you can ground it in whatever you believe in, whether it's evidence or other people's feelings, whatever it is.
We're going to try to do one more question, maybe two. I don't know. We'll see. But who's next?
We've got one from Catherine. Catherine, if you want to unmute and ask.
One sec, I've just got to find my question.
Move along.
Okay, here. I'm going to read just like Erin did. It's easier that way. I think you've been partially answering what I've asked already, but at the end, I have a suggestion. So you've talked about adjusting language for a particular audience and context. Mark mentioned doing copy editing at a newspaper where writers and editors are striving to reach a wide audience. And so basically the other end of that, taking a slow approach to language change. I was just wondering if you see a possible conflict between these two approaches. And if so, could one solution be to explicitly address language choices at the beginning of a piece of writing?
So yes, because content and context work together to create meaning. By changing the context, we can change the meaning and the impact. So by adding context, like you just suggested, having perhaps it's a content note by the editor, explaining, I don't know, pronouns, or whether it's an entire article, like some publications create entire articles that talk about, well, this is our thought process behind this change. This is why it's happening. Or you could have, like, depending on your publication, you could have a little sidebar that addresses it. You can weave an explanation through the article. Or if you might decide to not explain it. And I understand that as well, because sometimes as somebody whose voice is often marginalized, I get mad and have to explain something when you didn't explain this, this other idea. So why should I other myself? So like there's so many approaches to this. So I really recommend editors are brave, creative, and flexible. So if we lean into our editorial instincts for constantly adapting to the project that we're working on, I think that that will make most sense to you.
And there is, I mean, there's a natural conflict between being kind to people who use certain terms in certain communities, and being clear to your own community that you're writing for? And I mean, there's no, I don't know if this is a question, but there's really no obvious, there's no like, look it up in the book, okay, it says we have to do it this way. There's always going to be those conflicts, and I think the message is just approach them thoughtfully.
Right. So right now I'm editing a document that was written for engineers. And there's a completely different style I've never seen before, where it's a lot of capitalization of words that are generic. You know, you probably read stuff like that. So then I'm faced with like, so do I keep it like this? Because this is what they're used to, right? So this is what this is the language and the style that they're used to. Or do I kind of pull them more into a mainstream style, like infuse some Chicago style in there? Does that make sense? So like it's very similar. Editing for conscious language is very similar to editing is something else, right? We have the same considerations. Does it make sense? Does it make sense? Are we being unfair in any way?
Right. So, okay, so we didn't mention that you're a children's author. You've got like
Yes,
4 books?
I have. Okay, so they're behind me. Do you see they're
Oh, look at that on the right.
Ah, um, my first book was Whole Whale, and that came out during the pandemic. In fact, I learned that my book was being acquired March 2020. So it has been a very interesting ride, right? Just having my books come out. But before I started writing the Conscious Style Guide, which literally I was not able to do anything else for 2 years. I sold 5 books in 2 years, and then nothing because I was working on the book. But I'm really proud of my children's books because they all tackle some social justice theme. For example, Whole Whale is about inclusion. It's about how to change the structure instead of the people involved, right? So we don't exclude people, we change the literal okay, so this is a spoiler alert. How do you fit the whale? So Whole Whale, how do you fit the whale? Well, in my art notes that I pitched to the publisher, the way you do it is 2 of the pages actually fold out. So you change the structure of the book to make the whale fit. And this is a message for how we solve things in our society. Sometimes people are like, well, you don't fit the height requirements to, I don't know, go on this ride or apply for this job. But then why do you have those height requirements? Like, can you change the height requirements? So, and then my second book, So Not Ghoul, deals with cultural misappropriation, right? You have a little Chinese American ghost whose outfit is stolen by the most popular ghoul at school. So it's been challenging writing books, but also challenging making it adapt, have it be part of my whole social justice offerings.
Yeah. I mean, there is that theme, and what's next? Another children's book in the works, or?
I have a picture book coming out next year. It's called Nice to Eat You. It's all about if you could ever introduce murder in a picture book, this is it. And
Did I know that? I mean, why did I know that? I know that.
I don't know, maybe I brag about having a murdery picture book. But there are a lot of murdery picture books out there, right? If you've ever read John Clausen's I Want My Hat Back. Right. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm so bad at like accurate titles, but but right now I'm working on my next nonfiction book. So if you can give me if you can tell me what else you would like to see from me or read from me, please let me know. So my next nonfiction book to follow up the Conscious Style Guide. What do you want to learn about? Because I come from, like, I have over 30 years of experience as an editor. I've edited almost everything, that in existence. What do you want to learn from me?
So wait, are you saying you've got a follow-up to the Conscious Style Guide, but you're not sure what's going to be in it yet?
well, they tell me that do not start any book that's related to Conscious Style Guide until it's out. They say, well, we want to see how it does first.
Uh-huh.
Right. So there is no follow-up. So I'm wide open. So if there's something you want to hear my take on, please let me know. You can
All right.
email me. So plotter@karenyin.com. Plotter. It's inside joke. If you don't know what a plotter is, it's okay.
Well, we're out of time. I think there may be a couple of questions that we didn't get to, and I apologize for that. But Karen, it's always so much fun to talk to you. And the cool thing is, I know I'm going to do it again, probably on the show, and if not in person. So thank you very much. We're not sure if we're going to do a show next month. It's summertime. We have a couple of things sort of lined up, but we're not sure how that's going to go. And then we may take a little bit of a summer break, give you guys a rest. But Karen Yin, the book is The Conscious Style Guide. It's out in a couple of weeks. You can order it now. I ordered it in my library. I went to my library and did a Karen Yin search, and they have all your picture books
Great.
in the library system, which I thought was very cool.
Yeah.
I had the Conscious Style Guide. It said it was available, but there's an entry in there for it. So very, very cool.
So I want to add that you already know that pre-orders are really important to authors, because if you order before it's out, it actually sends a signal to booksellers and publishers like that they can invest more in marketing or selling your book. So if you are remotely considering buying it, please do it before before May 28th. There are always like book deals coming up. Amazon is having a book deal, I think this month. I don't know if my book will be included, but like there are constantly deals out there for you to get discounts.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody buy the book. Thank you so much. Thanks
Thank
to the
you.
Moving County Library here for being our studio for the day, and have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm going to go back out into the woods. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.